Okay, it's now recording for history.
So you can go ahead and introduce yourself as you feel comfortable participating in the discussion. Just a little bit about your background and maybe what led you to be interested in this particular discussion event. So a few things that we hope to touch on in this discussion are the tortured artist motif, the correlation or lack thereof between self-deprivation and pleasure, fascination with others' pleasure, body as a prison, mind as a prison, perfectionism, and I think we'll touch on that and so much more. So first of all, I want to just get some initial emotional responses. So what did the story make you feel upon reading it, and what feelings or emotions were evoked?
I felt like I'm the protagonist. Oh, sorry, do I need to introduce myself?
Sure.
I'm my name is Roman. I'm with the Slavic department, and I was excited about this event because 2 years ago I visited the Kafka Museum in Prague. It's a dark and gloomy place, like most of his stories, but it's also super exciting. It has some magnetism to it that attracts you to reading and exploring more about Kafka. And yeah, going back to the point that I started with, I could associate with the main character.
Any other initial responses?
Hi, my name is Steven. Sorry. I'm from the ELC department. I'm a second year PhD student. I came to this discussion because I love literature, so this is like a perfect program for me. My reaction to this story is my first reaction was it remind me, you know, those hunger stories told by my grandparents. You know, they experienced those hunger not by choice, but you know, they had to. They just had to deal with it. So this is something like the reason there was a profession like a hunger artist. I think maybe because in the past people didn't have a lot of food to eat, and lots of people might have to deal with hunger, and so being able to fight off the hunger and stay alive is, you know, is something people want to have. I thought maybe that's why there's a hunger artist profession, because there was a need for you to be able to do that, and people get like you know, impressed by people who can do this kind of thing. Another reaction to me is at the end I read like the hunger artist said like if there was any food he actually liked, he would have eaten them, but there wasn't. It reminded me of a couple of my friends. They are very thin, not because they wanted to be thin. There are just many food they don't want to eat, and I suppose that's part of the reason they were thin. You know, it's not a by choice something. Yeah, so those are my two reactions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kara. I'm a freshman here at University of Illinois, and I am in this discussion because my professor recommended me to look at it because we are currently studying this story in our class. And my first reaction to like reading the story and stuff, and my first emotion was very sorry for the main character, just because I feel like he felt forced to do his act for, like, I feel like that was his only talent he thought he had. And it just made me feel so sad for him that he had to go down that route. And at the end, of course, he is passes or, but it just made me really sad to like see him in that state and how he was like forcing himself to do this, even though he said he like loved it and stuff. I don't know why. I just felt so bad. I'm like, I want to give you food or something. The whole time I was reading it, I just felt so sorry.
So if there's no other kind of initial responses, we have some questions prepared, and you can certainly ask any questions of your own that comes up for you to pose to the group as well.
Yeah, before we proceed, I think I decided to share my first impressions as well. And I think I also kind of can identify myself with the main protagonist. Well, apart from it's just a interesting piece from literature perspective, of course, but I also can somewhat identify with the protagonist in a way that it looks like he knows what he wants, but then when he gets it, I think it's something about being in the moment and being satisfied, and not being satisfied with, even though you're kind of looking for it. I don't know. It's I guess mostly probably emotional, but the point is that it's kind of trying to achieve perfectionism, which is not achievable, and not stopping at the right moment, I guess.
And I can say some quickly if that's all right. Okay. Yep. I'm Nathan Sunshine. I'm a first-year graduate student in the Library and Information Science program, and I'm a graduate graduate assistant and grad hourly for International Area Studies Library. But the first thing that really struck me about this story was that his relationship with society, like it's him as an other, like he doesn't see him as part of society, like it's the rest of society looking at him. And when his profession really isn't viable anymore, like he can't redefine himself in a different relationship with society. And it seems like so much of that is grounded in his identity as an artist, as a performer, as someone who is really validated and craves the attention he receives through his act.
If I can maybe jump in too. My name's Ethan. I'm an English student, undergraduate. But I feel like I read this story with kind of like a niche perspective, just because I read David Foster Wallace's essay on why Kafka is like kind of funny before I read this. And I think going off of what Roman and Ogla kind of said about like kind of like feeling that you are the protagonist in a way, kind of goes in with that essay, because Wallace argues that Kafka kind of like unconsciously expresses something that's unexpressibly like true about like the human, like, I don't know, like way. And there was a quote in it where it's like, the really central Kafka joke is that the horrific struggle to establish a human self results in a self whose humanity is inseparable from that horrific struggle. That our endless journey and impossible journey toward home is in fact our home. And I think that like just Kafka like kind of putting that like theory in the story kind of helps people like kind of, you know, like attach themselves to the protagonist and like, I don't know, just kind of like, yeah.
So the first question that, thank you everyone for sharing those responses, and we'll get back to all of those things that you've brought up and more. The first question is, so it's kind of a two-parter. The first part is, have you ever seen anything in the real world that reminded you of the hunger artist spectacle? And then kind of a addition to that how would you define what it is the hunger artist is doing? So he's called in the text an artist. Is his fasting art? Is it a performance or performance art? How would you kind of define it or frame that?
Yeah, actually, I'm super confused. Like, I think at first he thought he's a artist, and at some point he doesn't want to communicate with this society. But like, after a while, I think especially he lose his fame. I think he started to sort of confuse these two notions together. Like, both he is relying on his performance to sort of define his art, but at the same time he still really he can't get away from this art being his lifetime pursuit. So for me, I guess I guess at the end of the story he started to confuse these two things together. And it's really strange actually. At the end of the story, people sort of try like focus more on the new and yawn animals which was put into the cage. So I don't know. I guess it's like these two notions are super intertwined in this story. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, do you feel like the story was a commentary on the way that artists have an identity as an artist, as kind of unique as opposed to maybe other professions?
And maybe also that it's something that Kafka himself was exploring, because I think in some of his letters, or maybe someone who was close to him, they commented that for him, the process of writing was his life. He didn't have, of course, he had life outside of that, but I think he only thought of himself as being himself while he was writing. And I guess as a talented person, I think he was trying to explore this and yeah.
If I may jump in with regard to the first question, which I think might be a little bit easier than your second question, Karen. So I just looked her up, but I remembered. I just wanted to make sure that I got her name right. But her name is Marina Abramovich, and she is a performance artist who does kind of similar things, to the protagonist in the story, except that I think she probably does similar things to Kafka, not to the protagonist, because she's pretty much doing those performances in museums and letting, if I remember correctly, letting the viewers, letting the audience do whatever they want to do to her. And eventually people do pretty nasty things. One would believe that, as civilized human beings, we would not do that, but people then assume that she is an object pretty much. And they kind of feel that power, to do whatever they want to do with her, and they start being mean and kicking her and doing all sorts of, and cutting her skin. So that kind of, but that project I is targeted at, I guess, revealing, the darker sides of human nature and what people are capable of when they can exercise control over somebody else. And with regards to the second, what was the second part? If you can just remember really quickly.
Yeah, how would you define what it is the hunger
Oh,
artist?
the artist. So it's kind of tricky because it's it's portrayed as part of, of the circus, And because we like you have an idea about that or very early on in the story because of the impresario and the fact that it's they're traveling and he's doing this in different towns. But I kind of, maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I immediately read it in a broader context, so I didn't necessarily tie it to like the fact that he's an artist and that's this kind of performance, like assuming another identity, although that's another avenue to pursue, I guess. But for some reason, I immediately jumped to a broader thing of like being trapped at work, and like it could be anybody. It doesn't necessarily have to be an artist, but just how society sort of imposes the fact that you have to work to make a living. And then society doesn't really care if you like it or don't like it. You just have to work. You are trying to like it because you realize that you're doomed to work. Yeah, and I guess I'm just gonna shut up here. Yeah, thank you.
Let's see. So the besides appreciation, which the artist craves, he wants to impress, and it says, quote, put on a performance beyond human imagination. So I think that's something interesting in today's world. I think people are pushing the boundaries, particularly in sports. If we think of the rock climber Alex Honnold and his scaling of El Capitan, if any of you are familiar with that, the things that as people become more accomplished, what is impressive is getting more and more spectacular. So how does this work or not as a creative force? What are other sources of creative inspiration beyond impressing someone? So I guess ultimately, what moves you to create?
Hi, my name is Sabrina. Okay, I'm an English undergraduate major. I feel as though what moves me to create is like emotional responses. Like oftentimes if I'm reading or viewing something and I have an emotional response to it, I feel like inspired to create something on my own due to the fact that like I can express my emotions better like through writing or through like a photo. So oftentimes I feel as though like being in like an emotionally like reflective environment inspires me to create things.
Mm-hmm. In the context of the hunger artist, at the end of the story, he says that it was very easy to him, and that was the whole secret, that it wasn't difficult at all. Do you feel that, and perhaps he might have done the fasting even if there was no audience for it? So do you think that he would have fasted himself even if he knew that no one would be aware of it? And do you feel like kind of the imaginary audience or the imaginary readership or viewership is one of the driving forces for anyone to create anything?
Hi, my name's Lauren. I'm a student at University of Illinois. I would say I think he needed the audience. I don't think the story would have been the same at all if he didn't, just because he really relied on like the people. Like he needed approval. I feel like if he didn't have like everyone watching him and seeing like what he could do and push limits, I guess he just wanted everyone to like really believe. And they said there's a passage towards the end, and it said if like it could only be him that like really received the true knowledge, like he was able to do this, because not everyone's going to stay awake to watch him perform endlessly. And I think since that can't happen, like you got to sleep as people, it's not physically possible, it's a limitation, that I guess like he can never be truly he can never get or obtain this like desired effect. I think he wants like immortality, so he can't like have everyone watch him obtain that, just because it's not possible.
Yeah, there's that other moment in the story where he is aware that the guards are perhaps letting him have a moment where if he could eat, he would, and that angers him, and he starts singing. So to be like, don't think that I'm not still fasting, which leads to the idea that art is as much about the way that it's perceived as the thing itself. Does anyone else have any thoughts about what moves you to create?
Sure, I think I could chip in here a little bit. I think it sounds a little pompous, but I feel it's almost this kind of the ability to be God in a way, this kind of demiurgy. So you create something that transcends you and your life and will probably stay on for posterity. And it kind of gives you that power, or it empowers you in a way that goes beyond the materialistic world. And I think that's a great feeling. This kind of almost like, not the will to, I don't want to go Nietzschean with the will to power, but it kind of gives purpose to your life, I think.
So I'd like to add on to what Lauren was saying. Like, I think it's pretty well documented that certain people feel more reward from eating than others. Um, like, I see that even in my family. But like, as people, like, we have a drive for self-preservation, so I don't think he would be starving himself to that extent if he didn't have an audience. Like, he has motivation because of the attention, but mainly because this is his job. Like, this is how he makes his money. So
And I think I was reading somewhere that it was actually a thing. This hunger artists actually were, and they were popular, especially before World War, the First World War. And I think it's something that goes well with what Stephen said before about this hunger, how for some people and some generations it's a real thing. And yeah, I guess food in general is such a vast topic. But yeah, I think I was surprised to find out that it was actually a type of performance. And another thing that struck me, I don't know why, but it says that there's people who made sure that he was actually fasting, and for some reason they usually were butchers. I guess I don't know. It sounds ironic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the blurring of reality, and I think that it's interesting that the way that we as in this modern world understand hunger and self-imposed hunger has probably shifted over time, and how maybe when this story was published in 1922, the way that people kind of collectively thought about what it means to be hungry and what it means to impose hunger upon oneself probably changes a bit the way that we read the story. Does anyone have any thoughts about how a modern audience might read this a bit differently?
I think like a modern audience would see it more as something like, is he okay? Is something wrong with him? Instead of something like an art. I think that there would be more like health concerns with it in a sense. Like instead of like thinking, oh, this is like his art, this is his talent, this is what he likes to do, this is what he craves to do. And I feel like they'd look at more of like, is he okay? Is there something wrong with him? Do we need to help him? Does he need someone there for him? Because I feel like the audience back then was like, oh, this is like so cool. This is such a great talent. But now we would be like, oh my gosh, we need to help him.
Mhm.
To me, if I heard someone saying there's a hunger artist in like downtown Champaign, my reaction probably would be like, I don't know, like what the point? What the point of doing that? Um, it's almost sort of cruel, you know, to stay there for such a long time without eating anything. Um, because I think now most people, at least in many countries, they don't have a problem with you know, have enough food. Also, like there are other competitions, right? Not competing um, who can survive without eating food for the longest time, but to compete who can eat the most, like who can eat the biggest number of burgers or hot dogs, things like that. So um, I think people are more attracted to this kind of competition, you know, who can eat the most. Why is that? Because now food is not a problem for many people like in the past. So we have a different environment for different performance, I think.
I also think that the contemporary audience might probably be more inclined to read this story more as a reflection on anybody who's you know, a creative person trying to make a living, or maybe even going beyond that and reading this as a condition of humanity more broadly. So anybody who has to work and kind of being trapped in that kind of love-hate relationship with work.
I also maybe want to add too that like in modern times, like there's definitely a lot more entertainment. And I feel like the Hunger Artist was definitely a form of entertainment back in the day. Like you'd take out your family to go see the Hunger Artist. And I think in like modern times, we're so surrounded by like all kinds of entertainment and distractions that it would be very easy to just not appreciate that it's like a conscious effort, like going off of what Stephen and Kara were saying. Like, you know, you just wouldn't necessarily get it that like why is someone doing this like consciously, like on purpose and everything. And like kind of going off what Nathan was saying too, you know, even if like there was no audience, like in modern times, I'm sure there would be very little audience. He would still most likely do it, just not to that extent, because the point of, you know, fasting to that extent is because of like the audience and like the entertainment of like others and everything. And I don't know, I just feel like, you know, just the growth of entertainment and, you know, just distraction in general in modern times would definitely like affect that drastically. But I don't know. Thank you.
I wanted to add, because the attention span is so short. I know, like, obviously for littler kids, it's like just like, you know, a couple minutes. And then as you get older, you develop it more and it's easier to like watch shows and all that kind of stuff. But I guess, yeah, with this type of performance, like you don't want to watch it for like days. Like it's amazing people would watch it for 40 days in the story. I thought that was really interesting. But with with what Ethan said, like with all these new media and like things, they're always trying to get your attention. So it's really hard.
So I think, you know, in the modern era, when I think of people who we sort of objectify for their thinness, I don't think of hunger artists. I think of mostly females who are models, who are musicians, who are actors. And it's interesting because instead of seeing it as sort of this abject practice, like we try to pretend it's normal, like we admire them for that. And I'm sort of wondering if that's sort of demonstrates how our societal relationship with food in the Western world has changed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I've read stories about models. They are forbidden to eat a lot to keep their figures. Another point is I think there is still something for the hunger artists in modern times, because but for different purpose. For example, they can perform to show people there are still people in other parts of the world who are who don't have a lot of food and who still experience hunger. So that's kind of like a purpose, like reminding people such things. Um, so I think that would be meaningful uh, for being a hunger artist today.
So that kind of brings us to the, I think what Kara was saying earlier about how a modern audience might be very concerned. And, there's all of these implications about why are you depriving yourself, like what Nathan was talking about. And is there some kind of, fetishization of thinness that this person is perpetrating? So, I wanted to bring our attention to the quote, "And if some good-natured person feeling sorry for him tried to console him by pointing out that his melancholy was probably caused by fasting, it could happen, especially when he had been fasting for some time, that he reacted with an outburst of fury, and to the general alarm began to shake the bars of his cage like a wild animal." So my question is, as the hunger artist becomes enraged when it is suggested to him to eat, what does this represent? What does this enraged reaction represent in the story? And multiple times in the story, characters are sympathetic to the hunger artist and encourage him to eat. What does that represent? And what does his enraged reaction to that sympathy represent?
I have a very simple answer to that. For me, that episode was like just he was really enraged by people not understanding his art. I guess he has his own definition of this fasting, and people should some sort of have some philosophical thinking about his action, but people are not getting him, or he does not have any philosophical thought, but he's like expecting people to respect his act, or uh, I don't know. We yeah, like we don't know what he was thinking about, but at least he was not termed with the audience, and he sort of get enraged by that. Um, and I also think it's really interesting when Kafka brings in the supervisor of him. He was like sort of trying to explain away his rage afterwards. Um, so I guess like it's also sort of present art as a group cooperation in which multiple voices are trying to uh, present their own explanation of one act. Um, but yeah, at least I think his rage is coming from this misunderstanding between the audience and the artist himself.
Mm.
I might actually submit that the hunger artist doesn't necessarily understand his own art, because like you said in the beginning, like he kind of like he wanted to put on a show that no one had ever seen before and like win admiration and everything. But by the end of the story, we see that not only like did he kind of like lose his first job and like have to go to the circus, but when he did so, he said that he could. It's not that he didn't want to go into another job, but like that hunger artist most likely couldn't go into another job. And also by the end, he also like wins the admiration of like the attendants, but declines it, saying that like he did it because it was so easy and because there was no food that he could stuff himself with.
Mm.
And I don't know, it seems to me like he didn't necessarily like understand why he was like fasting, other than to, like it was his job and that's what he had to do. It was easy to him, and there was a demand for it, so he started doing it. And when the demand faded, then he couldn't find anything else to do, so he had to go to like the circus and do it with the animals. And I don't know. It just seems to me like the hunger artist himself didn't necessarily like understand the end of his art. He didn't understand what the purpose of it was necessarily.
Can anyone think of any times that you've encountered a work of art that you feel that perhaps the artist's intention was misunderstood from the general public's reaction to it? Or there was a discord between the work of art itself and people's response to it?
I guess it always happens like I guess like there's a very famous violin channel on YouTube. They often says like classical musics are often misunderstood by publics in modern time, and like oftentimes like mass media often depicts classical music as a dull um, and like an attractive thing, and sort of publics are sort of buying this idea of classical music. So I guess like there's always a misunderstanding between the audience and what an artist would define his art. Yeah, there's a lot of examples of that.
Going to what Ethan was talking about the quote at the end of the story, because I couldn't find the food I liked. If I had found it, believe me, I should have made no fuss and stuffed myself like you or anybody else. So the hunger artist claims that he never found any food he wanted to eat, and that if he had, he would have stuffed himself like anyone else. So my question is, in this story, what does food represent? And more importantly, what does enjoying food represent in this story?
I think uh, enjoying food means you have a real hunger. You really want to eat, right? And for this hunger artist, like hunger is not the usual hunger as experienced by other people, because he hasn't found any food he want to eat. So he just didn't want to eat. So that's the difference, I think.
I have a follow-up point of that. I think at the end, he sort of confused necessity with a preference. I guess at the beginning, I don't know. I guess like at the beginning, it was just a personal choice or something, but it connects to the idea of performance art. It's just your choice to perform, but like sort of afterwards, this choice kind of became a necessity for this artist. Like I don't know. It's just like he sort of confused these two together, and making a preference equals to a necessity for his living. Um, yeah, so that was like what I get from that single sentence.
And I think that was really underscored in the writing. Like this character was called the Hunger Artist. Like that's what he was called. He didn't have an individual name. He was just sort of defined by what he did instead of who he was.
I have a. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I agree with the previous point of how the like you can't like in the beginning, like the hunger artist was like, oh, my body wants to not eat, but I think by the end the wants and the need kind of went together, and he couldn't recognize like what wants and needs were by the end, because he was so like into his art, and he was so like I feel like he was just so into it that he kind of just like didn't see reality. Like he didn't see like, oh, I am like dying, I'm on the verge of going to die, but I want this, but he actually needed it instead.
Mm.
I was about to say I have a different view, because I think at the end, the hunger artist actually confessed like what was the real reason he could stay, you know, in that kind of state. But before he died, I mean, when he was still performing, um, that was his job, and he didn't want to tell people the truth. You know, oh, I can stay like this because I haven't found any food to eat. And imagine the audience reaction, right? They won't admire him at all. You know, and this is nothing to admire. You are just different from us. So you know, he didn't want to tell people the truth because that was his job, and that was the reason for his maybe also existence. So that's why he wanted admiration, you know, admire. You know, I'm just like you, but I can stay hungry. You can't. Um, I think that's a point to make, and that's also why he didn't want people's sympathy. You know, oh, you're like this, sympathy or any other suggestion for him to eat food that was like offense to his profession. He just want admiration, and he, you know. So I think, and that's why I thought like uh, his last words was actually his confession, not like a mixing, you know, reality with other things.
Mhm.
I also wanted to go back for a second to Nathan's point about this distinction between what you are and what you do, and does the latter define the former? In other words, does what you do define what you are? And I think that's this interesting tension that Kafka's creating there.
Mhm. Yeah, it's often, I think, said that in a capitalist society, people often identify themselves by their profession first, as opposed to their relation to other people, for example. And I think that this idea of, you know, making money, having a job, um, and how that can serve as an identity for people is a little bit complicated, if by the panther, or maybe not complicated, but it's added to it. So the panther at the end of the story is described as being, quote, furnished almost to the bursting point with all that it needed. Seemed to carry freedom around with it too. Somewhere in its jaw it seemed to lurk, and the joy of life streamed with such ardent passion from his throat that for the onlookers it was not easy to stand the shock of it. But they braced themselves, crowded around the cage, and did not want to ever move away. So the story concludes with this image of the panther radiating the joy of life. So how does this shape our understanding of this story, this idea that the panther is also in a cage, the same way the hunger artist was in a cage, I guess would be an interesting way to start this. And but it seemed to carry freedom with it, and it was well fed. The panther. So I'll just leave it at, how does the panther shape our understanding of the story?
Well, I think the panther is like the complete opposite, obviously, of the hunger artist, because he's fed, he's muscular, people want to watch him just because he's full of energy. And the cage, I think the cage kind of represents two different things. I think for the hunger artist, it kind of represents maybe like his body, like he's trapped in his body, maybe because like he wants to just kind of never eat, and that's impossible because he needs food to survive, and without nourishment he won't. So I kind of thought that would be like a idea. Otherwise, the cage for the panther, it's just kind of containing, you know, like a very vibrant energy inside of it. The panther probably doesn't want to be there, but he is able to thrive in that environment.
Do Do you feel that if capitalism is kind of the metaphor that we've chosen to kind of read in this particular instance, this particular text, and professions and the kind of inescapable nature, if you live in a capitalist society, you get a job, and that kind of infiltrates the way that you understand yourself. How do we feel like that metaphor that we've kind of chosen to read the story with, how do you feel like that works with the way that the audience viewed the hunger artist versus the way the audience viewed the panther? Or another question that we could look at would be the panther seemed to, in its strut seemed to lurk the joy of life, streamed with such ardent passion that for the onlookers, it was not easy to stand the shock of it. So what do you think would draw an audience towards a spectacle of suffering and deprivation versus being shocked by this spectacle of joy and strength?
I guess the cage here act as a very important job for people to appreciate these two different things. I I'm trying to make sense of that because like even if the panther is like sort of a symbol of freedom or joyfulness, he's pretty much not aware of the fact that he's in a cage and he doesn't have a freedom as the audience. Maybe they're outside that cage, they enjoy sort of freedom, but like the cage to me represents a sort of illusion of these concepts of freedom or the illusion of art. And I guess like the relationship between the spectacular and the artist, sort of like the equal reflection, like people outside of the cage are pretty the same of the cage and the artist himself. So for me, it's just like I guess like people are enjoying these things just because like that situation was separated by the cage and they were viewing that outside of their daily life, I guess. So I don't know. There's a lot of things going on there. But for me, it's just like the cage sort of represent a kind of illusion and also act as a separation between the audience and the artist so that people sort of regard the artist inside as an artist and as a performance that they can watch.
Mm-hmm. It was said earlier that the hunger artists fasting reminded some of us of, very thin models of Marina Abramovich's performance art, in which, in some cases, she is physically harmed in order to create her artistic statement. Do we feel like there's a how if we were tasked to come up with similar modern day kind of metaphors for the panther, does anyone have any ways that they would understand a fascination with the panther in today's world?
I'm not sure if this is necessarily a stretch or anything, but I kind of found it interesting. I don't know, it could be considered like a metaphor for like, I don't know, like the news or like the modern attention span and everything, because the hunger artist, he's doing something consciously with a purpose, but it's something that happens often. It's going on for 40 days and it's going to happen again after that. And, it's not necessarily like, I don't know, something that's like, intriguing that's going to happen like once and it'll be like super exciting and then it'll be over. And I guess the panther in a way isn't like that either, but the panther is still super exciting. It's like, especially in the beginning when panther first arrives, you know, everyone's super attracted to it and like wants to view it. But I imagine give it a year or two or something and people will grow just as tired with the panther. And I feel like it might represent like the cyclical nature of just like, you know, modern attention spans and everything, you know. We find something interesting for a very short amount of time and then move on to the next thing. And if you have something that's going to be like continually restated, even if it's like incredibly important, it could be like the most important thing ever, but if it's restated every day or like every minute, then it's gonna grow less meaningful.
To me, I mean, no offense to, but Panthers in modern times, I would say, to me, my impression it would be like the Kardashians. Uh, they are flashy, they are successful, they are pretty, and their life is full of drama, and they are everything. We're not, so we want to watch them, and so that's kind of similar.
Maybe it's a wrong analogy, but I personally felt that the artist, the hunger artist, was attracted to the audience because of the liminality of what he was doing. So like, is he gonna die or is he gonna live? So that's the transition. And as Ethan just said once, that kind of, you know, lingered a little bit, then people lost interest. The Panther, to me, again, so the opposition that I'm trying to draw here would be between human and something that, you know, once everybody understood what it was about and could relate to it, then they lost interest. And then maybe versus non-human, or in this case, I would say technology, maybe. So something that becomes a fad, but then and is lively and attractive and strong and mysterious for a while.
I kind of saw this as like trends. So it's like once like you have a trend, everyone's so interested in it, everyone's so like obsessed with it, and then once a better trend comes around, they kind of just forget about it and it goes into history. Like you can look back at it, but it's never as interesting as it was during the high points of it all. Just like the panther, like now the panther is seen as like, wow, this amazing creature in the cage is so interesting. But then in like a year or two, as Ethan was saying, like, where's the interest? If something better comes in that cage in a year or two, they're going to be interested in that.
Now, on the other hand, panther is kind of it's nature, and no matter how many times we see, I don't know, change of leaf colors in the fall, we're still fascinated by that. So maybe there is this kind of distinguish between man-made, man-imposed, and then something that is belongs to natural world that still has this power and has this, well, as Kafka said, joy of life.
I love that the distinction between a an animal that's kind of on display, just acting as itself, and then a human resisting its natural inclination to eat, and that the kind of the distinction between something acting out in a natural way and something consciously trying to act unnaturally. So I guess the last question that we could end on, it's been an hour, is as the hunger artist dies, his dimming eyes remained the firm, though no longer proud persuasion that he was continuing to fast. So why in his last moments is the hunger artist no longer proud of his fasting? Why up until his dying breath was he still intent on fasting, even though he was no longer proud of it?
I'm not sure if this necessarily applies, but one thing that kind of interests me about that line and then one from before is, you know, dying is kind of like the ultimate fasting, you know, in a way. And there was a line earlier here, it's on, I'm not too sure, but it says, he had only held out for a long time and illimitably long time. Why stop now when he was in his best fasting form, or rather, not yet quite in his best fasting form? I took the not quite yet in his best fasting form to mean like the best fasting form is when he is dead, when he can no longer even eat. And he may have lost the passion to do so when he dies, but like he's still, craving the fast, he's still craving nothing. And I just found it interesting that even before he died, he kind of understood that dying while fasting would be like the ultimate way of fasting in a way. I don't know, just like the ultimate like kind of representation of his art. It's like to die while doing it, and to do it unlimitedly.
Yeah, and also like pride, thinking about pride is actually something that is relative in the society. It's actually nothing about the completion of the art itself. Like the pride is like generating from people's admiration, um, people's viewing you, um, people think you're special or sort of thing. So I guess like following Ethan's opinion of like dying is the ultimate form of fasting, I guess like at that moment he's like truly achieved his like ideal of this fasting art for me.
Maybe also because this was the transition from the performative to the real, in the sense that when he was dying, he could probably feel that's the last thing, and it's no longer a performance because he, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A more positive note to finish today's session.
Yeah. I think it's I think that my favorite part about this discussion was the kind of negotiation between understanding the hunger artist as his fasting as a participation in a kind of capitalist society versus prior I'd seen it more as a disassociation from a society, but I think that this was a very good discussion. Thank you so much for everyone for coming and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you for doing
Thank you
this.
for hosting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone have a good day.
Shall we stop recording?
Oh yeah, it's a good.